Kong Jin-Hoo becomes unemployed after suffering an accident in the army. Things looked bad because he returned to live with his mother in a small house, but the boy soon discovers that this accident gave him the ability to predict the future. His first thought is to use this power to his advantage, and with that he manages to save a good amount of money. After the protagonist uses everything he has to invest in some companies that he knows will be successful, his money starts to triple and he becomes confident in becoming the #1 investor in the world. The story begins in an ordinary town in Korea. The reporter of a local newspaper interviews some people who pass by. He asks what they would do if they suddenly got 100 million won. The first woman replies that she would try to buy a house. The man says confidently that he would buy a car. The second girl says that she would make an investment. The reporter then decides to ask the final question. He asks what is the first thing they would do if they were the richest person in the world. Obviously the answer is that they would do nothing for the rest of their lives. At that moment the opinions are analyzed by the journalist, who presents the newspaper live. She says that they are good answers and greets the guy, who is in front of her. The woman introduces him as the youngest Korean to become the richest man in the world. Then she questions what his secret is. But before the journalist also says that there are rumors that he can see the future, as we can see this guy is our protagonist Kong Jin-Hoo. He laughs and denies that he can see the future. Suddenly his eye shines a yellow light and he notices a lady near the camera operator. At that moment a huge golden eagle flies inside the room, leaving behind some words shrouded in smoke. Kong is a little paralyzed. The presenter calls him back to reality. The protagonist concentrates and replies that he became rich because he is a lucky investor. Suddenly the boy opens his eyes scared. Kong realizes that it was all a dream. What the boy doesn't understand is why that eagle he saw in the army still keeps appearing. All his dreams are ruined by it. At that moment Kong looks around realizing that he is still poor and unemployed living with his mother. The boy looks at the frame where he has a family photo and remembers that he has had good times. At that time his father was alive and had good business to support the family. Now he lived alone with his mother and accepts any part-time job to help her. Suddenly the protagonist leaves his thoughts when he receives a call. A little later Kong arrives at his friend's house, named Taekyu. The first thing the protagonist notices is that the guy continues with the collection of girls. He says that Taek really doesn't change. The friend disagrees and says that now he has a much more colorful collection. Kong replies that he can't even know since the guy has had these things since high school. Taek laughs and asks how life is going. The protagonist tells that he has recently become unemployed, but he is confident that things can change because he has a prestigious university degree, so he thinks that maybe he can give private lessons and make things a little easier for his mother. The two toast with a can of soda. The protagonist also decides to thank his friend for last Christmas spending time with his mother, since he couldn't stay. Taek replies that he didn't have any problems because he considers Kang's mother also his mother. The friend then asks how was his time in the army. Kong prefers not to talk about it. Taek then says that there is something he really needs to tell him. The protagonist listens to the serious tone of the conversation and asks what happened. At that moment the friend reveals that he found the password to his Bantcoin account. Kong asks what it is. Taek questions if the guy really forgot. Bantcoin is the virtual currency he earned by selling his character from the game Lutnia. The protagonist finally remembers. He also remembers that at that time the coin rose to 50 million won. Taek even cried because he had lost the password and obviously all the money. The friend laughs and says that thank God he managed to find it while cleaning his room. He then asks how much Kong thinks the coin is currently worth. The protagonist has no idea. Taek replies that until yesterday it was costing $1,120. Kong starts doing the calculations in his head and converts the dollar amount to won, which is the currency of his country. The guy immediately has a shock. He realizes that even with the rate his friend has more than 1 million won. Taek raises his finger and gives even more shocking news. He says that 1 million won is only for 1 BNT. The protagonist doesn't seem to understand. The friend then explains in more detail that 1 million won is equivalent to just a single BNT coin. Kong stops for a moment and again does the calculations of all the coins that Taek has. He is soon surprised to realize that his friend has more than 13 billion won. Taek says it took him a while to believe it, but it's really true. Kong yells asking his friend to donate at least 100 million to him, since it won't make any difference in his wallet. This is the kind of thing I would do if I found out that my friend became a billionaire overnight. Taek replies that he can't give a penny because he put everything on the exchange platform. By his calculations the money will continue to rise. The protagonist calls him a petty idiot, then says that if he had known that he was going to give so much money, he would have taken the game more seriously. Suddenly a memory comes to his mind. Kong remembers that at that time he gave one of his characters to take to sell. He then asks for his share of the money since his friend took his character's money. While Take is shaken asks how much his part is, Kong stops for a moment thinking about how much he should receive. Suddenly his attention is drawn to the window. As soon as the protagonist looks, he sees that same eagle from his dreams, but now in real life. The boy starts to tremble and asks why this is happening again. The eagle starts to fly and invades the apartment. It is shrouded in a strong yellow light exuding its power, and as soon as it passes it leaves some words scrambled in the middle of the smoke, which eventually becomes clearer. It is at this moment that the protagonist deciphers what those messages are. Take realizes that his friend is a little lost and tries to bring him back to reality. Kong asks if he knows what the mountain hill is. The friend replies yes. Mountain hill is an exchange platform where his Bantcoin is kept. The protagonist looks at the words left by the eagle, where he states that the mountain hill will fail. He then worries about Take and asks if the guy is sure that this platform is safe, or if there is no danger of going bankrupt. Take does not understand the meaning of this sudden conversation and replies that he trusts the platform 100%. The protagonist feels as if he is going crazy. He even thinks that all this is a hallucination this eagle appears from his time in the army and always leaves some messages. Anyway, the boy decides not to risk it and yells at Take to take all the money he has on the platform. The guy is obviously taken by surprise and questions why he's asking for this so suddenly. Kong screams as he grabs his friend and begs him to take the money now. He promises to tell him why he's asking for it later. Take obeys and calls his sister. He asks the girl to take all the Bantcoin off the platform. Meanwhile, the protagonist realizes that the words left by the eagle have disappeared. In a way, he believes that he is not hallucinating because he ended up getting the name of the platform right. Suddenly his friend shouts that this is not possible and looks at his cell phone. He says that the platform Mountain Hill just went down. It seems that the server went down. The good news is that his sister managed to get the money out in time. Hearing this makes Kong believe even more that he can predict the future. At this moment, Take receives another news. It seems that the platform is back online, but this time all customer accounts are empty. People are commenting on the internet about the money disappearing from the platform without notice. Take approaches Kong and asks him to please be honest, since he promised that he would tell everything if he took the money from the platform. The protagonist thinks for a moment and decides to reveal the whole truth. He says that he has the ability to predict the future. A few minutes later, the scene changes to what happened a year ago, when Kong was still in the army. It was there that he saw that eagle for the first time. It appeared when the soldiers were doing ordinary training and testing some bombs. The protagonist called the attention of the other men and asked if they could see the size of this eagle, but the answer was not very good. They said there were no eagles. Then they asked the protagonist to focus on training. Kong looks where the animal went and finds the messages in the smoke, where it said that KM-188 was going to explode. He looks to the side and sees the soldiers equipping the next test. The name and number are the same as the messages. The protagonist realizes this and his eyes fill with horror. The test was carried out and the bomb exploded while still on the ground, injuring and eliminating several soldiers. The protagonist managed to throw himself on the ground in time and had little injury. The scene returns to the present moment and the friend is surprised to hear this whole story. He is happy that the protagonist survived. Kong recognizes that he was very lucky. Most of the soldiers had fatal injuries. After this happened, the doctor said that the accident caused some confusion in his memory. Take says that this doctor's answer is kind of vague, but anyway, the protagonist has already witnessed this phenomenon of seeing the future twice, and both times the information was true, so he doesn't think it's a coincidence. Take says that this looks more like a superpower. Kong is surprised and thinks a little about it. After all, superpower is something you only see in movies. In addition, he is impressed that his friend believed him at first. Take replies that he would believe it even if a cute anime character appeared in front of him. The protagonist says that it is better to go to the main subject. He wants to know where your money is. His share is 1,200,000 won. Take asks how he arrived at this amount. The protagonist explains that at that time he sold his low-level character, so of the 11 billion that Take received, his share is 1 billion. This is about 9% of the 13 billion won that Take has now. The protagonist threatens to burn all those cute dolls if the guy doesn't deliver his share. Take tells his friend not to threaten him. In addition, there is no way to get the money out now. Kong replies that he understands that he must be planning to create a tax haven or something. Take is surprised and asks how he knows. The protagonist asks if the guy forgot that he is an economics student. Take says that his sister said that if the income tax is generated from Bitcoin, he will have to pay billions. That's why he created a tax haven in a place called Ilhadela. His company is called OTK Company. The protagonist asks if OTK is the abbreviation of otaku. The guy shouts saying that he has nothing to do with it. In fact, it is the abbreviation of his name and surname, Otake. Then the boy celebrates by saying that as soon as he redeems the money, all that's left is to live a life of tranquility forever. The protagonist looks silly and asks if he hasn't been doing it all the time, trading the game items. The friend is outraged and tries to refute this accusation by saying that it's not that easy to make money selling the items. Kong accepts this answer and only asks his friend to pay what he owes. Take gives a reassuring smile and promises that he will pay as soon as he manages to transfer the money. The protagonist also gives the same smile. It was thanks to a prediction that the protagonist was able to receive an amount that he never even thought he would have. Next day, he goes to a bank to redeem the money transferred by his friend. Arriving there, the protagonist received a deposit of 500 million won. Take revealed that he had no way to send all the money now, but then he would find a way to get the remaining 740 million with his sister, since she is the one behind the rescue of the money. Then he asked the protagonist to be patient. Kong replied that there was no problem. At this moment, he keeps the money he received from the bank, and the first thing he thinks about doing is to help his mother stop working for a while, and buy new clothes for her. Then the boy enters the mall and sees a line of people gathered near the bathroom. Kong approaches, realizing that it is an argument. A female voice says that she is going to make a complaint on the store's website, but first he wants the woman to kneel down and apologize. After all, she doesn't even know how much these shoes cost. The manager lowers his head and apologizes to the rich woman in front of him. Then he turns his face to the lady who is being humiliated, and tells her to kneel now, just as the madam ordered. The protagonist's face is incredulous when he realizes that the person being humiliated is his mother. At that moment, the blonde who makes the scandal tells her to kneel or else she must pay for her shoes. The manager asks the protagonist's mother if she will obey or prefer to be fired. Kong observes how her mother is dressed and remembers that she always said that she worked in the call center of the department store. The lady knows that she cannot lose her job and begins to kneel, but before that happens, the protagonist pulls her by the arms. She looks back and sees her son. Kong questions what happened for the woman to demand that someone kneel. The mother turned her face embarrassed. The snobbish blonde gets annoyed and asks who he is to meddle in this matter. Kong replies that he is her son. The mother quickly interrupts him and says that she does not know the protagonist. Obviously, she does not want her son to be harmed. But the protagonist asks if she is ashamed of him. Then she says that she is not ashamed of who her mother is. The snobbish woman is surprised to discover that the boy is the son of the cleaning lady. The protagonist then asks again what happened. The blonde replies that her mother's mop ended up touching her shoe. The people who are watching the commotion look surprised at the blonde woman. There is someone even recording this situation. Kong does not believe that this is the reason she is using to humiliate her mother. The snobbish woman is annoyed for not having her reason taken seriously. She then asks if the boy knows how much his shoe costs and says that the value is 600,000 won. The protagonist can't stand this noise in his ear anymore and takes 600,000 out of his pocket, then gives it to the woman. Kong demands that she apologize to her mother and take the money away, or keep her precious shoes and leave empty-handed. Suddenly someone shouts that the woman is being filmed and thinks that she better accept the money. Kong asks if she prefers him to throw it down. The snobbish woman thinks for a moment and decides to accept the money. She says she is sorry without any emotion and turns to leave with the money in hand. The protagonist then calls the manager and orders him to be sure to get these shoes. The woman doesn't understand what he's talking about. Kong explains that he paid 600,000 for these shoes, so he'd better get them tomorrow or he'll report the store for theft. The manager quickly says he'll make sure to leave everything the way he asked. Kong calls his mother to leave. The snobbish woman says that the protagonist won't even wear the shoes, so he's just being stingy. Kong agrees that he won't use them and adds that he'll throw them in the trash tomorrow, then calls the woman old and thanks her for reminding him. The woman screams annoyed at being called old, then continues to make a scandal in the store. People look on without understanding this whole show. Meanwhile, the protagonist and his mother are outside the mall. The woman tells her son that if she goes back there she can still fix everything, but Kong asks why she is accepting to be treated like this. He promises that this will never happen again and hugs her. The woman is still very shaken by the humiliation she went through, but her son says he will protect her. The mother gives a satisfied smile and says that he has really grown up. A little later, the two sit down to have a meal at the popular restaurant. The protagonist has already told everything about Bantcoin to mother. The woman was surprised that there is something that makes so much money. Kong says that she no longer has to worry about paying for his college because now he has money, but the mother says that her college money has been saved for a long time, so he better focus on going to college. The son replies that they can solve it later. First he wants to use the money to buy a new home. Kong says that he is sure that his mother's coughs are due to that small house. The woman tries to say that she doesn't have to worry, but the protagonist asks her to just accept what he is doing to improve her health. The mother then sighs and says that he is just like his father. Suddenly the conversation is interrupted by a call from Take. The protagonist answers and the boy on the other end of the line starts shouting that an emergency has happened. He asks, "What happened?" Take shouts that his sister is back in Korea. A few hours later the scene changes to the Namsan Shilin Hotel. Passers-by point to something on the track and start laughing. At that moment we see that the protagonist is with his friend in a very funny car, an otaku car. Kong can't hide that he is very embarrassed, but Take looks very happy. After that they enter the hotel and Take asks why the protagonist wanted to be left on the street. This is a very obvious question for the boy. He says he didn't want to participate in his nerdy world. Suddenly a voice catches their attention. The girl complains that they were 3 minutes late. This is Take's sister. Her name is Hyunju. The girl is surprised that the protagonist also went to pick her up. Kong addresses her affectionately as Mana. They decide to sit together to talk a little about how was this time they were away. Hyun asks how was the time in the army. Kong replies that he was discharged a short time ago. She then suggests that they work together at Golden Gate when he graduates. The protagonist says that it is only the company accepts that he will go. Hyun gets serious and he asks what happened. She talks about the platform Mountain Hill and asks her brother if he really went bankrupt. Take replies yes, but he managed to get all the money out in time. The sister looks surprised. Take says he put everything in the account of the ODK company, more than $10 million. Hyun sighs in relief and hands over a letter. She says that this is the contact information of the manager of the Golden Gate branch in Gangnam, in case he needs to transfer a large amount of money to a household account. This is the contact of the person who can take care of it. Hyun adds that it is enough to mention that it is his younger brother. Kong analyzes the information. The sister then asks why Take sold everything at once, since at first he said he was going to sell it little by little. The brother couldn't deliver that the protagonist saw the future, so he replied that he only felt like it. Kong asks if she came to see Take, but Hyun denies it. She says that she came to solve something from the company she works for and will stay here for 10 days. Take asks if she is really going to stay 10 days. Hyun gets angry and asks if he has a problem with that. Take tries to answer that he is not and asks where she is going to stay. The girl replies that in this hotel. Take is surprised because the place is very expensive. Hyun says that the whole team will be staying together. She doesn't worry because it's the company that is paying. The protagonist remembers that to stay just one night at the hotel you have to pay 500,000 won, but he believes that this is not a problem for a billionaire company. At that moment Hyun receives a call and moves away a little. Take soon asks Kong if he is scared by his sister's personality. The protagonist blames his friend for it. Hyun comes back and says that the call was about the OPEC meeting calendar. Take doesn't seem to know what it is, but soon remembers that OPEC is the abbreviation for Organization of Oil Exporting Countries. The protagonist carefully observes the conversation and asks if they are a group of oil-producing countries. Hyun confirms that this is exactly it. To be more precise, it is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. The girl keeps saying that the results of the OPEC meeting will be announced the day after tomorrow. Suddenly Kang's attention is attracted by a light. He again sees that eagle. It passes by and leaves another prediction of the future. This time the protagonist sees that OPEC will make a production cut agreement. Hyun quickly calls him and asks if everything is okay. Kong apologizes and says that he is only thinking a little. He then goes straight and asks Hyun what is the chance of OPEC making a production cut. Take is surprised by this question. Kong explains that the USA is indeed a producing country, but the amount produced is still far from domestic demand. This means that even though it is an oil-producing country, it has maintained the position of the largest importer. However, recently the United States has started to develop shale oil. The biggest disadvantage of this oil is that its production is expensive. The cost of production is estimated at about $45 per barrel, so if the price of oil falls below $50 per barrel, The forecast is that more than half of the companies that depend on it will go bankrupt. Hyun drinks his tea quietly and says that they are already aware of this matter. That's why OPEC member countries hastily held several meetings to discuss production cuts. But the interests of oil-producing countries always ended in failure. So she thinks that the meeting will not reach any agreement. The protagonist asks what will happen if they reach an agreement. Hyun replies that the price of oil will skyrocket and the market will be happy, but the probability of this is extremely low. Kang asks if she believes or not that they will reach an agreement. Hyun questions why he is insisting on it. The protagonist realizes that he talked too much and tries to reverse the situation, saying that he just thought too much. Hyun laughs and says that if they reached an agreement it would be good. A little later the protagonist returns home and takes nerdy car. He thinks a little about the prediction he saw. If the OPEC production deal really works out, the price of oil will skyrocket. Kang realizes that if he buys oil in advance, he can generate a significant profit. The boy remembers that his previous predictions were right, so this one can also okay. The problem is how much money he can invest. Kang just signed a lease and plans to give about 100 million won to his mother, so the money he can use now is 275 million won, but he still has 740 million in Take's account. At that moment the guy asks the protagonist if it happened again. Kang replies that he really has a sharp perception. His friend laughs and says that he is curious to know what he saw. The protagonist quickly has an idea and realizes that he forgot to talk to Take about his strategy. After a few minutes Take watches the plan carefully. He asks if the goal now is to buy in advance so that when the oil goes up, they can make a lot of profit. Kang confirms that this is exactly what he is thinking. Take looks a little confused and asks how they are going to stack all the oil barrels. The protagonist slaps him on the head and tells the guy to pay attention to the traffic. A little later that day, they meet in front of the computer. Kang says that according to Hyun, the WTI company can barely keep around $60 per barrel. Take is shocked by this information because he even heard what his sister said, but couldn't understand anything. The protagonist then decides to explain it in detail to his friend. He speaks that crude oil is not only used to fuel cars, it is also used in various sectors such as industry. This means that an increase in oil prices has a significant impact on producer prices. Take understands and says that he will send 500 million won to him. There are $11 million left in his account. About $673,000 is from Kang. After passing on all the information he says he is ready to buy. The protagonist instructs him to buy it on the New York Mercantile Exchange. He says he will invest $300,000 for now. Take replies that he will also buy. Kang asks how much and the guy replies 10 million. He is surprised by a high amount and asks if it's 10 million won, but Take says it's $10 million. Kang asks if he's crazy to buy all this. The friend lowers the amount and asks if 5 million is good. The protagonist looks a little uncomfortable. The friend then reminds him of the prediction. Kang replies that it seems that Take believes much more in the prediction than he does. The friend makes the last bid and says he will buy 3 million. He states that he will not buy less than that. Kang finally agrees. He thinks again about the prediction and tells himself that if he is wrong he will accept the loss and then sell his share. His only concern is to ruin the 3 million Take, but he knows that his friend will not give up this amount, so he has no other choice. Without thinking twice the protagonist takes out his cell phone and buys the shares. It was so fast that Take couldn't even follow it with his eyes. He asks if everything went well and Kang answers in the affirmative. The friend answers what will happen from now on. The protagonist says that they just need to watch the OPEC meeting end. The next day the protagonist moved with his mother to the new house. He closed a rental contract for about 120 million won. The house is a little old, but everything is clean and the floors have been changed recently. The mother says she loved the house. It has 2 bedrooms and the sunlight comes in well. Kang is happy to hear this. He believes that he could have bought a better place if he hadn't invested in the prediction. Anyway, it's very good that his mother liked it. Suddenly the protagonist notices the woman hesitating to touch one of the boxes. He remembers that when his father passed away, his mother donated some of his belongings, but there is something that she would never have the courage to throw away, the photos of her father. At that moment the woman looks at one of the paintings where the family is gathered. Kang remembers that her mother's old dream was to have a house. Her father managed to buy a plot of land and made that dream come true. That was their first home, where Kang was born and raised, so he understands that sometimes the mother can get a little sentimental. After all, most of the family's memories are there. At this point Kang asks if she thinks about her father often. The mother replies yes. She thinks that if her husband hadn't worked so hard he would be alive to this day, so he could be moving with them. Kang observes the painting, the woman starts crying, then she wipes her tears and says she still has some things to take, then tells her son to bring all the things from his room. The protagonist agrees. After some time, Kang does a review and says that there are a lot of things they need to buy new, such as a washing machine, refrigerator, dining table. He approaches his mother and says that she needs to take a break from work, but the woman is against it and says that she is healthy. The protagonist asks her to take at least 3 months off. Her son's insistence manages to convince her. At that moment, Kang hands over an envelope and says that he put about 100 million won in this account, so he can spend it on whatever he wants. The woman is surprised by the amount of money, and the next moment she starts hitting the boy. She asks if he is out there distributing money to anyone. After being beaten, Kang replies that his mother is not just anyone. The woman obviously worries that her son is spending too much money on her, then says that he has his own savings. She suggests that the boy save the money and use it to buy a house in the future, or even save it for his wedding. Kang insists that his mother accept it or at least see it, as if he was leaving it with her for now. The woman accepts and says that he is as stubborn as his father. The protagonist remembers how much he still has in his private account and believes that he will not need to do anything else for the next 20 years. A little later that day, the doorbell rings and Taek enters. The protagonist's mother goes towards him and asks how boy is. As we can see, Taek has his hands very full. He hands 2 bags of toilet paper rolls to the protagonist and asks him to consider this a gift for his new home. Kang looks incredulous and asks if the guy really had the courage to give this here as a gift, when it's full of money in his wallet. Taek thinks his gift is good and asks what he should have brought then. Kang gives a smile and says he would accept something simple, like a refrigerator, a washing machine or a TV. Taek yells at the woman that her son is trying to extort him. Minutes later, the two sit on the floor of the protagonist's empty room and eat some apple. Kang asks if he is aware that the Mountain Hill really went bankrupt. Taek says that it is only talked about on the internet. The Mountain Hill was the largest cryptocurrency exchange in the world. The damage is estimated between billions and even $1 trillion. Normally the platform was supposed to compensate for the damages, but the value exceeded what was expected. Finally, the Mountain Hill preferred to declare bankruptcy. The protagonist soon asks what will happen to the people who were harmed. Taek said that he believes that there will be no way to recover the Bantcoins. This means that those who did not withdraw the money in time ended up losing everything. If this bankruptcy had happened in some bank, probably the government would have reimbursed all the people, but the Mountain Hill is a cryptocurrency platform, so it is almost impossible for the government to interfere. The friend comments that it is amazing that the protagonist predicted the bankruptcy in time. Kang replies that it was just a coincidence. Taek gets serious and says that nothing in life is by chance. Kang asks if he has any guesses. The friend then starts screaming that he has a superpower that he awakened in the moment of crisis. Kang yells at the guy to speak softly and asks if he went crazy. Taek claps his hands and says that this is how superheroes are born. The protagonist has already gotten lost in the conversation. Taek says that he has discovered his power. From now on he will call it the Eye of the Oracle. Kang replies that he doesn't like that name and reminds that they need to worry about something really important, the OPEC meeting. Taek remains lost in his thoughts and says that Eye of the Oracle looks really good. Kang asks if he is talking to himself. He says that he may even consider this nickname if the prediction about the OPEC meeting is correct, but if it fails it is good to remember that they will lose money. Taek is confident in his prediction and makes it clear that he will call it the Eye of the Oracle if everything goes well. The protagonist sighs heavily. The next day Kang goes to Taek's house and asks what his sister said about the meeting. As we can see, the friend is focused on the game and with various foods around. He replies that Hyun said he will only know tomorrow. The protagonist gets anxious and thinks that his prediction failed. He starts to sweat cold, remembering that the stock prices have fallen another 3%. He and Taek have already lost 100 million won. Kang fears that the worst will happen. The friend quickly reassures him, saying that he trusts his prediction, then invites him to play a game. Anyway, they will only know the answer tomorrow. Kang is happy with Taek's positive way and asks which game they will play. The boy replies that his name is dating. The protagonist picks up the console, but he can't get it out of his head that if he continues to lose money, he will end up bankrupt in the very near future. At this point, the dating game presents 2 options for the player to choose to answer. The protagonist ends up selecting the option he would rather go out with his ex-girlfriend. Taek asks what he's doing and tries to get the console back. Meanwhile, Kang continues with his thoughts that everything will go wrong and he will end up poor. having to teach and never finishing university. The two stay trying to see who will get the console until the protagonist shouts that the OPEC result is out. Take is scared by the expected information. Kong takes out his cell phone and accesses the website Quick News. The new information says that the countries have reached consensus for the first time. The second news reports that international oil prices have risen after OPEC's decision to cut production. The protagonist realizes that things are happening as predicted. Now for everything to work out he needs to know how much the WTI company is selling, since it was there that he bought the shares. Kong quickly accessed his account and was surprised by the price of a barrel of oil. It is costing $73. It increased by more than 20% in a few minutes. The protagonist immediately asks his friend to check his account. Takes out his cell phone. Kong says that for now everything is going according to plan, but all he predicted was only the production cut, and not how much they will receive. Lies in bed while accessing the account. The protagonist gets anxious and asks all the time how much they received. Suddenly the guy shouts that he made $630,000. He tries to convert to Korean won. Kong is faster and says that this is worth 700 million won. At the end of the day the protagonist needed to receive 740 million but counting on the investment, now he will receive 800 million won. At that moment the friend says that he really should have invested $10 million. Kong replies that it is easy to say when it has already worked, but reminds him that he trusted the predictions from the beginning. The friend strikes a pose while saying that he has no reason to be afraid anymore. There are already 3 correct predictions. This means that his ability is real. Kong starts to think about it and asks if he really sees him as those cartoon superheroes. The friend confirms. He says that normally when people think of superpowers, think about flying or destroying buildings with their fists. The difference is that this power can be replaced if you have an airplane or a bulldozer. However, the power to predict the future is irreplaceable. Even now with the advancement of computers and AI, it is still impossible to see the future. Believes that the protagonist can do very well if he can predict disasters or even sports scores. The protagonist covers his eyes as the energy emerges. He says he doesn't know exactly how it happened. Assumes it was in that accident in the army. Maybe he awakened the power because of it. Kong says he doesn't understand why the power only came to reveal itself now then. He says that if he had this vision at that time, he would have run away to a casino and get rich playing those games, but at the time of the accident, the prediction only appeared once and never again, so he thought it was an illusion in his head. At that moment remembers something. He says that Kang's prediction came from when he told about Bitcoin and the OPEC meeting, then suggests that the prediction is only related to finances. The protagonist replies that it is not a bad theory, but in this case the explosion in the army is out of the script. The friend replies that this prediction was probably an exception because it caused risk to his life. Suddenly seems to have an idea and he desperately asks what happened after the explosion. The protagonist doesn't understand why this now. The friend quickly explains that if his prediction is only related to finance, maybe that explosion was not accidental. Probably this case is related to corruption in military procurement. Runs to the computer saying that there is a chance that the KM-188 bomb was already defective from the beginning. Kong says that maybe his friend isn't entirely wrong, but if he thinks about it, all disasters caused by man are directly or indirectly related to finances. Soon says that he has a great idea. Kong replies that he is afraid when he says something like that, but decides to listen to him. Suggests that they form a duo. He will provide the money and Kong will provide the superpower, then they will be able to invest together and then share the profits. The protagonist thinks it's a great idea, but asks what will happen if they lose money in the middle. Replies that they won't be able to do anything, just keep investing. Kong doesn't know if this type of contract is fair since his friend would bear all the losses alone. He then tells that he would love to do that, but there is a big problem in this plan. He can't guarantee that what he sees is 100% accurate. If the prediction is wrong they can lose millions. Kong keeps talking while his friend can't stand to hear this same story anymore. Is almost covering his ears. He says that the boy needs to be more positive. In the end his 3 predictions were right. If they don't take advantage of this ability now, then yes they can lose money. Then takes his hand in his direction and invites him to dive together into the world of investors. The protagonist looks at his friend with a silly face and asks what will happen if he doesn't accept. Replies that the friendship would end. Kong says it looks a bit shallow. The guy continues with his hand raised and asks him to play. The protagonist feels pressured, but he is soon saved by a call on his phone from a person named Min. The boy answers and the person on the other end of the line invites him to have a drink in Hongdae, adding that Kihung is also going. The protagonist sees this as an opportunity to escape. He immediately agrees to meet with his friends from the university, then says goodbye to Take, saying that they will continue this conversation later. The friend tries to stop him, but it is in vain. An hour passes and the protagonist arrives at the Coma bar. He enters and soon sees his friends. Min calls him Sergeant Kong, but he says that he has already been discharged, then asks who all these people are. The veteran replies that the girls are freshmen who entered university this year. The one with black hair introduces herself as Huang Jaihai, the blonde introduces herself as Shin Yuri. The protagonist greeted the two and then asked where Kihung was. Min pours some drink and replies that Kihung will be a little late. Kong starts drinking. The friend asks if he won't go back to university. The protagonist thinks about it. Now that the problems of home and tuition are solved, he thinks it's a good time to go back to school. At that moment Yuri asks to serve more drink and he accepts. The girl also drinks and thinks it's a little strong. Kong replies that 3 bottles of soju are no problem for him. Suddenly someone else enters the scene. Min greets Kihung and he approaches the table. The guy comments that he hasn't seen the protagonist for a long time and asks how he is in the military. Kong replies that he left a while ago. The friend says that he should have warned him. The protagonist justifies that he thought he was looking for a job, so he preferred not to get in the way. Kihung replies that he was really busy, now he works in the financial sector, but he is going through problems. The guy starts talking that the commercial bank is fine, but next year the new investment bank hires will be smaller. They are currently thinking about creating a big investment bank. Many employees are complaining. The protagonist is shocked and asks if the friend is not safe as a new hire. Kihung replies that actually not, even new hires are being instructed to resign voluntarily, so it's a difficult decision. Kong asks worried what will happen if he is fired. Kihung replies that he plans to invest in private capital, then live off this income. It's something he's always been interested in. The veteran next door says he thought everything would be fine when Kihung got a job, but that doesn't seem to be the case. After a few hours the group has already drunk several bottles of alcohol. Kihung continues to complain about the work, saying that there are great entrepreneurs, but there are no great investors in his country. The protagonist just observes. Kihung says that maybe a genius investor will appear to save them from this disaster. At that moment Yuri receives a call and confirms to the person on the other end of the line that he is at the Coma bar. The veteran asks who it is and she replies that it is Siona. Yuri says that he told his friend that he was going to drink with the veterans and she said she would come too. The protagonist gives a frightened scream asking why she invited Siona. Yuri asks confused why he shouldn't call her. Suddenly the door of the bar opens and a beautiful girl with gray hair enters. The protagonist looks angry and recognizes that it is Siona. The girl looks at him surprised as if she did not expect it meeting him here. This was their first meeting since they ended their relationship. A few minutes later the scene changes to the two alone in a cafe. They preferred to leave the group so as not to cause any discomfort. Siona says that it has been 2 years and asks how he did in the army. The protagonist replies without much emotion that he did very well. He then asks how her relationship with Hyung is. The girl quickly replies that she is fine. Kong and Siona had a relationship during the university time, but he went to the army and the girl ended up falling in love with someone else. At that time Siona ended up hanging out with a senior who visited the university briefly during the festival. This guy is Jun Hyung, the third son of the owner of the GH company. Kong found out about the new relationship while still in the army. When Min decided to tell him, the protagonist remembers that he felt very sad because he liked the girl very much. At that moment, he tells Siona that she has changed a lot. The girl agrees and in the next moment apologizes for breaking up. When he was going through a difficult time, Kong replies without emotion that it's all in the past now. Siona sadly says that she really liked him. Kong almost chokes listening to this. The girl keeps saying that since she saw him for the first time, she felt that he was different from the others. That's why she loved and trusted him 100%. The protagonist asks why she broke up then since she had that feeling. Siona reveals that she couldn't miss the opportunity. Kong asks if the opportunity was to date a rich guy. The girl replies that she won't try to defend herself from it because in the end she was the one who broke up first, but she did it because she wanted to make her dream come true. Kong asks what that dream was. The girl takes a deep breath and gets up to leave. The protagonist yells at her to wait and tries to hold her. He asks what the dream is. She looks back and replies that it is success. The protagonist sits alone at a table and thinks about the latest events. 2 years ago his family lost their house before holding his father's funeral, relatives turned their backs, and in the middle of all this Siona decided to end the relationship. Kong felt that everything was falling apart in his head, and he couldn't do anything. This was the reason that encouraged him to join the army. His mother had no support and had to take on difficult jobs to survive. At this moment the protagonist mentally thanks his friend Take. After all, it was thanks to him that he earned 1 billion won. He laughs remembering that his ex talked about being successful. It seems that he knows well what that means. Suddenly the eagle appears and the protagonist, who is already out of his mind, offers a drink, then asks what it will show this time. The boy then sees the forecast and raises the glass of drink, saying that this is his future. At the end of the night the protagonist broke into Take's house and tried to wake him up. The friend smells the alcohol from afar and asks Kong to go home to rest. The protagonist keeps pulling his arm and keeps repeating the word success. The next day Kong finally wakes up. He realizes that he is at Take's house and feels a strong headache. The friend as always is playing and warns the protagonist that he ordered a hamburger for his hangover. Kong asks if he has never heard of soup, then takes the hamburger. Take asks if anything happened last night. The boy thinks for a moment and soon remembers the eagle. He gives a smile and says he doesn't remember anything. The friend starts shaking his shoulders while asking if Kong has already decided on yesterday's plan. The protagonist decides to solve this matter soon and asks if he has ever invested in his life. Take replies no, he just withdrew the Bantcoin. It seems that the protagonist doesn't know that much about investments either. In fact, he has tried to invest a few times, but failed in all of them and didn't even have a return. The friend then asks if he didn't study administration. Kong says it only lasted a year and barely remembers what he saw. Take says that he currently has $1 million in the account, which is equivalent to 13 billion won. The protagonist knows that it is an amount that normal people will never see in their lives, so he feels lost about what to do with so much money. What is not lacking is capital to invest. Take could easily live a quiet life with all the money he has now. The protagonist's concern is always the same, investing money and ending up losing. But as we can see, the friend is dying to invest. Kong asks why he wants to invest the 13 billion won. Take replies that the more the better. The boy throws the roll of the hamburger back and says that they can have fun doing it. The protagonist, being a much more cautious guy, says that it's fun when you're making money, it stops being fun when you start losing. Anyway, the boy feels that he is not yet ready to have this partnership. He remembers all the predictions he made previously and wonders if he could really predict the future when it comes to financial issues. Just as Take said, he comes to the conclusion that he first needs more information. The protagonist has spent the last few days checking out large cap stocks listed on the stock exchange. In addition, he also tried to understand about the price of stocks, oil price, gold and exchange rates. He was a lot of time dedicated not to make any mistakes. Kong was lucky because currently the government requires banks to disclose important information. Thanks to this, it is now possible to see the good and more news about the company, but obviously they will not release any information that could harm their business so much. This means that the information is not of that much value. The protagonist comes to the conclusion that he needs more privileged information, such as the mountain hill or OPEC. Take advises him to be more patient. In addition, he comments that it would be better to sign the contract. The protagonist is confused about what he is talking about. Take says that his sister always says that to make any partnership it is good to have a contract. Kong goes to him and signs the contract, then said he was going to get a coffee. Take replies that there is no coffee at home. Suddenly the protagonist's phone rings and the number is unknown. The boy answers. The person on the other end of the line identifies himself as Yuri. Kong repeats this name a few times and finally remembers the blonde girl at the bar, then replies that she can talk. At this moment Yuri shyly asks if he is free and invites him to have a coffee. A few minutes later the protagonist arrives at a nearby cafe. He enters and Yuri quickly waves. The girl thanks him for coming even though she called from nowhere. The protagonist replies that it's okay because he was at a friend's house nearby. Yuri is a little embarrassed and asks why the boy is looking that way. Kong replies that she is very similar to the member of a girl group he saw in the army. Yuri asks if this girl was beautiful. The protagonist gets shy and decides to change the subject. He asks if she is from here. The girl replies that she came from Cheongdam. This information takes the protagonist by surprise and he believes that the girl is very rich. After all, it's hard to believe that a freshman from Cheongdam came to live here. Kong decided to understand why she called here. Yuri replies that he actually wanted to apologize for what happened to Siona. The girl lowers her head several times and says that she has never been to a meeting with veterans, so he didn't know how to behave. The protagonist replied that he didn't need to worry so much because it wasn't her fault. Yuri asks if he's planning to come back next semester and he replies yes. She says that if that happens they will be in the same class as the second year. At that moment Yuri remembers something and says he has a favor to ask for. Kong looks curiously as the girl turns her face in shame. This reaction awakens an idea in the protagonist, and he soon believes that the girl plans to confess. The boy thinks for a moment if he should refuse, but mentally says that she is too beautiful to receive a no. At this moment Yuri breaks his expectations by asking him to go with her to change her cell phone. The girl explains the sudden proposal by saying that she believes she will be deceived if she goes alone. The protagonist is incredulous and stutters when answering. He almost planned the wedding and the children. Kong is embarrassed to have imagined that the girl would confess. He quickly replies that he is not very good with electronics. Yuri replies that he does not need to make an effort and adds that he only needs your presence. The first thing the guy remembers is that Take is the best escort for this case. The otaku knows all the releases and is always on top of the prices. The scene changes for the two entering an electronics store. Yuri tells the salesman that he is looking for a Samsung Electronics L6. The attendant replies that this is the most popular model currently and asks to follow it. Yuri talks to the salesman while the protagonist decides to take a look at the cell phones. He finds the model that Yuri is thinking of buying and remembers that he used the L3 before going to the army, but now the most current model is the L6. Time really flies, suddenly. Kong is surprised by yet another prediction. The message this time is that the L6 model will be discontinued. The protagonist looks intrigued when suddenly the girl touches his arm. He gets scared and retreats. She asks what happened. Kong replies that it was a mosquito. The boy is happy that he finally received another prediction. Yuri finally buys the cell phone and they leave the store. She says that she bought it by contract and will have to take very good care of it. The protagonist looks at the device and ends up letting slip that it will be discontinued soon. Yuri asks what he said. Kong realizes that he spoke his thoughts out loud and tries to reverse the situation by saying that it is just a joke. After that he starts running and waves to the girl, wishing her a good return home. She tries to say something but is left alone. The protagonist breaks into Take's house and the guy asks why all the noise. Kong quickly makes a summary of what happened and even shows the Samsung phone. Take seems not to believe that his friend had a prediction that the L6 model would be discontinued just by tapping on the cell phone. Kong says he doesn't know exactly how this will happen because Samsung Electronics launches a variety of smartphones, from budget to premium. In addition, the L series is Samsung's bestseller, but the protagonist also recalls that the smartphone market is currently dominated by NPL, so it is possible to say that the two brands are enemies. NPL launched a smartphone called Phone. Sales and profit beat Samsung by a landslide, so they say that this L6 was made with the intention of competing with Phone. Take finds this prediction strange because Samsung's L6 will hit the mark of 70 million units sold. Kong is also a little reluctant to believe and asks what could be the reason for it to have been discontinued. The friend suggests that it could be a patent dispute. Samsung Electronics is known worldwide and there are probably many enemies in different countries. A while ago the patent dispute with NPL became known as the process of the century. Kong begins to understand his friend's thinking and says that normally the company that loses the patent dispute has to pay for damages or licensing fees. This is the only reason they find to justify the stoppage of sales, but Take wonders how he will get to this. He believes that there is no way Samsung can lose because the brand has a huge amount of communication and technology patents. In the last dispute involving a patent with NPL, Samsung counterattacked using its communication patents. They were successful in this aspect. Thinking about all this, the boys come to the conclusion that they know nothing. The protagonist's last suggestion is that there may be a problem with the Samsung product itself. Take replies that it still doesn't make sense. When a device has a problem, the brand offers repair or compensates the customer. It's strange to stop the production of something that is successful. The two friends talk for a while longer and point out the points they believe, but nothing makes sense and they prefer to sleep because they can't stand the subject anymore. Suddenly in the middle of the night a scream is heard from Take's apartment. The protagonist gets up scared and asks what happened. The friend quickly replies that this thing exploded near his head. He says that he was playing on L6 when he got sleepy, so he put his cell phone to charge and slept, but out of nowhere the device exploded. At that moment the two approach the burned cell phone. Take asks what kind of cell phone explodes the first time it's charging. The protagonist replies that he doesn't know, but surely if he had known he would have warned him. The two look at each other after this comment when they suddenly notice a large bubble emerge from the cell phone. The next day, Take reveals that he has already done some research and there was an explosion accident before. After 3 days of the launch, a photo was sent to the community. The customer told that the device exploded while charging. Thanks to the quick response of Seosong Electronics, the case was covered up, but even so there were several similar reports on social networks. Take believes that the brand is trying to silence people with money. The protagonist asks what Seosong said about the explosion. The friend replies that they tried to justify it by saying that it was due to the external impact. But anyway, the accidents were not so common. There were small problems besides the explosions, but it didn't really affect sales. Kong asks if there was a problem in the manufacturing process. The friend replies that he believes not. Anyway, they got some information that can help them now. The protagonist agrees and says that in the other predictions they didn't have to think much. They just invested or took the money from some account, but now in this situation it is necessary to know the moment of discontinuation and its effects to understand how to invest, then suggests observing the situation for a few more days. The next day the boys received a visit from a Seosong engineer. He said he was going to warn about the cause of the explosion after an investigation, then tried to talk to the boys about the compensation in money. An important condition to receive compensation is not to publish any information about the explosion online, at least until the results of the investigation are released. The boys wait for the man to leave, and the protagonist says that the company does not seem surprised to find out that his phone exploded. Judging by the employee's reaction, they have probably seen this case repeated several times, much more than has been posted online. In addition, a device exploding can seriously injure a person. The protagonist believes that if this continues it is reason enough for L6 to be discontinued. Take says that the annual operating profit of Seosong Electronics exceeds 30 trillion won. Of this operating profit 40% comes from communication, which includes the smartphones. The protagonist asks if they will lose 40% of operating profit if L6 is discontinued. Take replies that not exactly. After all, Seosong have many previous models, but it will cause significant damage. The friend explains that if each phone costs 1 million won, then the refund amount alone would be 6 trillion won. Considering the expected profits, the losses would multiply several times. The protagonist understands his line of reasoning and says that the question now is how to invest. If the forecast was good it would just be to buy stock, but as it is bad the option is limited. Take asks if it is not for this type of situation that short selling is useful. The protagonist replies short selling itself is not difficult, it involves borrowing shares, selling them and buying them back cheaper to pay and make a profit. The question is the profit margin. Even if you sell a stock worth 100 million won and buy it back for 10 million won, the profit margin will be low. In addition, the protagonist thinks that no stock will fall that much. The drop would be 20 to 30% at most. Investing 13 billion won to earn 3 to 4 billion is a huge profit, but he believes that he can still find a way to make a higher profit. Take again reminds the protagonist of the college he went to in management, but the boy doesn't remember anything he learned there. He says he needs someone with more knowledge. The first person that comes to his mind is Hyun, however he wouldn't know how to explain it to her because he needs this information, not to mention that he sees the future. Take suggests that the boy just explain that he trusts his vision. Kong replies that he really underestimates his sister, but is reassured because he knows someone. The friend asks who the person is. Kong replies that it is Park Sang-yeop, former president of the Royal Investment Club. Some people call him a lunatic, and others call him a genius. In the world there are two types of geniuses, those who are brilliant in multiple areas and those who excel only in one. Sang-yeop belongs to the latter group. He grew up in Australia and as a child his grades at school were low. When he became an adult he became interested in the stock market. One day he found a company called QMK Tech and predicted a 10-fold increase in the stock price. So he quickly secured 5 million in shares. After that the company actually increased the stock price and Sang received 50 million won. When the protagonist entered the university the professor had already earned 300 million, but even so he felt that it was not enough. Sang continued studying and a stock that caught his attention was that of chemicals. He sold all his shares and started buying chemical options, but this investment didn't work out very well because the company just went bankrupt and he lost everything. Sang he had to borrow from loan sharks, and when the day came to pay he had to commit some illegal practices. After that, the man just disappeared from the map. The scene changes to a restaurant. The protagonist tells Sang that it was very difficult to find him. The man scratches his head in embarrassment and asks if Kong will pay for the food. The protagonist replies yes because the teacher always paid for him when he needed it. Then he introduces his friend to Sang. The man asks if Take is the friend who bought Bantcoin in high school. He soon starts to say that the boy could be rich if he had found the key to the account. Kong gives an embarrassed smile and mentally thanks his friend for finding that key. Then he asks how the teacher has been during this time. Sang replies that he is currently teaching math to students going to college. The man says that the low salary made him realize how valuable even a single 101 coin is. The protagonist remembers that Sang went from earning billions to being in debt overnight. It is a difficult reality to face. The teacher soon asks why the boy sought him out. Kong replies that he is seeking to better understand futures and options. Sang asks if he went through the process to open a futures and options account. The protagonist replies no, but in fact he has already created it through Take's OTK company. Sang explains that futures and options have a difference, then asks if the duo knows which one it is. Apparently the boys only know the name. The professor decides to explain in detail. He says that futures are contracts in which both parties agree to trade a specific quantity of a commodity at a price. The objective is to guarantee a fixed value without price increase or decrease. Whether you win or lose depends on the price on the date of the contract. Both parties are obliged to complete the payment despite the profit or loss. Kong takes his notebook and starts writing down everything he is hearing so as not to run the risk of forgetting. The teacher continues to say that on the other hand, in the case of options, you are selling a right to trade. The right to exercise the option belongs to the buyer. If the customer does not want to buy, he will choose the next one. Take then asks if in this case the seller is at an advantage. Sang replies that in the market the win rate is higher for the option seller. Take asks if the seller wins anyway. The teacher answers this question with an example, then says that the highest probability will always be on the seller's side. He asks Kong to do the calculations of a stock by paying 101 and making a profit of 9,000 times. The protagonist comes to the conclusion that he could earn 9 trillion won, but the professor brings him back to reality saying that he is right. But this result is dreaming too big. Anyway, it is good to know that when things like this happen, the price of put options skyrockets hundreds of times and the seller of the option has to pay this amount. Sang does not recommend playing with options, but asks where they want to go with it. The protagonist explains to the professor about Samsung Electronics. The man asks what can go wrong if the L6 series is doing so well. Kong says that smartphones are exploding. Sang asks if there is any more evidence that the line will really stop. The protagonist doesn't know how to answer this because he can't just justify that he had a vision. Sang again advises that it's not so reliable to deal with options. After all, that's how he lost everything. After a while, the boys say goodbye to the teacher. The protagonist tells his friend that he just heard that they could lose everything, then asks if he still wants to move on. Take confirms that he is ready and asks what he thinks. Kong gives a smile and says that it is time to try. The guys decided to believe 100% in the prediction, so they started to prepare for the two forms of investment. The first one is low risk and low return, and the second one is high risk and high return. Kong suggests buying 70% in options and the rest in short selling. Even if the rate of return drops, it is good to have a second option to avoid the worst-case scenario. The protagonist assumes that the price will drop by about 10%, counting on refunds it will drop to 20%. At this point, the friend calls his attention to say that another Samsung cell phone exploded. The new report happened in the USA and the international media began to be interested. Take asks where the boy intends to buy options and he replies that at HTS. HTS is the abbreviation for Home Trading System. It is a computer program that allows individual investors to trade stocks outside of stockbrokers. In the end, Take gave his 13 billion for the investment. He decided from the beginning that he would pay the amount alone and the protagonist would only lend his skill, but Kong didn't think it was fair to let him invest alone and put his 800 million available as well. They will depend on the stock to fall as predicted so that they can make money. After making the purchases, the two sit in front of the computer and wait. After 2 days, the Samsung share price rose by 8%, contrary to expectations. The short sale that only profits when the shares fall naturally registered a loss of 8%. Take stood in front of the television watching his money go away, visibly worried. Cell phones kept exploding around the world, but things seemed to be happening very slowly. The protagonist tries to convince himself that everything will work out in the end. The friend desperately asks if the discontinuation will be notified tomorrow. Kang replies that probably. The next day, the famous domestic media and foreign journalists filled the press conference room. The president of Samsung named Dong was forced to give an interview because the media kept reporting about the explosive phones. In short, the president blamed the explosion on the battery and promised adequate compensation to the affected customers. In addition, they announced a new launch and a better battery. Finally, the president ended by saying that he would have complete responsibility for 6 million units declared. Kang and Take were surprised. After all, they expected the company to discontinue manufacturing and not to pay the people affected. On that day, people filled social networks with diverse opinions, some defending the brand and others not. In the end, the company had to spend 6 trillion won to solve the problem, something that the protagonist did not calculate. There were still rumors that the company would not suffer such a big loss because the damaged phones would be refurbished and sold. After the company had to spend a large amount of money, the stock that had been falling recovered and closed down only 1%. This means that the protagonist made a profit of 1%. Take celebrated that the shares were going back up, but Kang knew that they probably wouldn't recover everything he lost. This 1% was nothing compared to what has already gone. What made the protagonist sadder is that most of the loss was his friends. He puts his hand on his head and asks at what point he interpreted the wrong view, how things could not be working out. That night the protagonist couldn't sleep and kept thinking about the losses he had. He believed that he could spend it all if he used 1 billion won a year, but now that amount is gone in a few days. Little by little the thoughts were suffocating the boy. Suddenly Take gets out of bed and asks if everything is okay. He woke up to the noise of Kang moving. To calm him down, he decided to invite him to get a beer. The two went down to a nearby convenience store, and Kang couldn't stop thinking about the loss. He asked if his friend blamed him for what happened. After all, nothing would have happened if it wasn't for his prediction. Take says that his friend is not to blame and adds that he was the one who suggested investing in the first place. In addition, it may be that paying the damages does not solve the problem of Samsung. Protagonist thinks about his friend speaks and has an idea. The only thing that could harm Samsung was if the problem of the explosion was not in the battery. Anyway, he decides to stop blaming himself so much and say that he was wrong, especially because the answer will only come with time. A week passed after Samsung's announcement and the company started to pay all affected customers. While this was happening, they put other products on sale and more than 30,000 new units were sold in a single day. Obviously, it was a relief for the company and the new buyers were also satisfied. With that, the share price of Samsung Electronics rose again. Unfortunately, Kang and Take suffered a very large loss. Of the 13 billion won, only 3 billion are left. The protagonist knows that it would have been worse if he had bet all the money on the option, but fortunately he also put money in short sales. At that moment, Take goes to the window and starts shouting that the money is leaving. The protagonist just observes. He also lost a lot of money with it, about 600 million. According to the forecast, he has until the 7th for the discontinuation to be presented by the brand, so Kang can do nothing but wait. He also remembers the professor talking about how dangerous it is to put money in options. That's how he lost all the money and fell into debt. Take says he should have bet everything during the OPEC reduction meeting. He jumps on the bed and says that now it doesn't matter because he also lived well without that money. The scene changes to an airplane, where it is possible to hear the screams of the passengers. The co-pilot had to leave the cockpit to put out the fire caused by a Samsung cell phone. The owner of the device had serious injuries and was treated inside the plane. A burned paper appears identifying flight HL 745, and with the date December 9th, suddenly Kang wakes up and realizes that everything was just a dream. He turns to the side and feels the same energy in his eyes as when he sees a forecast. Take approaches quickly and asks what happened. Kang holds his head while repeating the words 4 days from now. His friend doesn't understand what he's trying to say and asks what will happen in 4 days. The protagonist with a terrified expression replies that something will happen in 4 days that will cause L6 to be discontinued. Take picks up his cell phone looking for new information about the company. Meanwhile, Kang says that this prediction seemed different from all the others. Take finds new news about another case of explosion with the new product offered by the brand. The protagonist runs to the computer. The consumer posted a complaint saying that the cell phone caught fire after he connected the charger. To make matters worse is the new cell phone offered by Samsung with the new battery. The president of the brand gave a new interview and blamed it again on the external shock. The boys have more confidence in the company's bankruptcy. Take is anxious to get his Money back, the protagonist smiles and says that it didn't end until it actually ended. He remembers that in the first clarification the company blamed the battery, but then they changed the battery and the cell phone continues to have the same failures. The boy tries to understand what the cause of this is. Kong takes a deep breath and tells his friend that it's better to go back to sleep. They'll be watching the next 4 days to see how things are going. Exactly 4 days later, the prediction that the protagonist had with the plane came true. The newspapers commented again on the accidents with Seosung mobile phones. The passenger who was carrying the phone suffered burns on his thigh and fingers. After that, an emergency landing was made. This news soon reached the media around the world and on all airlines. Some airports designated L6 as a prohibited item for hand luggage and checked luggage. At 8 a.m., an emergency meeting was held at Seosung's headquarters, an hour after the company's shares began to fall by 10%. With each passing hour the drop increased and reached 13%. The protagonist and the friend were obviously following all this. Take says now is a great time to buy. The scene changes to the conference room of the Seosung Group headquarters. The shareholders greet Vice President Jin Yong. The president of relations named Dong starts the meeting saying that in the first investigation the problem was the battery and it was changed. One of the shareholders then asks what the problem is this time. The man replies that he doesn't know because it is still under investigation. Or Vice President Jin asks how long he thinks he needs to get the results. Dong replies that apparently a week is enough. Jin takes a deep breath and asks if the men are suggesting to take responsibility and cost once again. One of the shareholders replies that gaining time is the priority now. Jin believes that trying to fix things will not convince consumers. He starts to think of a solution, and the only method he finds is not so pleasant. The Seosung company was founded by his grandfather and then passed to his father. Jin took the position of vice and started to lead the whole group after his father got sick. Now he doesn't know exactly what attitude to take and wonders what his father would do. His attention is drawn to a decoration ship, and the boy remembers when he was a child. His grandfather presented the decoration as Theseus ship. The story it was about a ship that was preserved for 1,000 years. People started to change some parts so that it would continue to work, and in the end it was difficult to find the original parts of the ship. The grandfather explained that the same goes for a corporation. Over the years Seosung will release some electronics that will be replaced. This means that there will come a time when he will need to change and give up his old ideas. At that moment Vice President Jin remembers all the teachings of his grandfather and has an idea. He plucks up the courage and announces that he will discontinue L6.